Good to go. Right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our talk this evening. Thanks for joining us. We are recording this, so we can share it later on to all those who aren't unfortunately able to make it tonight. Obviously, good flying today, so people are scattered around the country. Quick introduction from myself to anybody who hasn't met me. My name's Dan Starsmore. I've been playing around hike and fly races now for about 5 or 6 years. I started by supporting Ali in a Borns to Fly 5 years ago, and since then I've raced 2 Borns to Fly and 4 Dragon Hike and Flies as well. Ali, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, hi, I'm Ali. Dan and I go way back to university days, and yeah, I've always had a love of being up in the hills flying paragliders, which took us all around the world doing all sorts of cool stuff. And I'm now chief flying instructor at Paragliding, where we organise the Dragon Hike and Fly race. I was inspired by the Borns to Fly, really, this idea of short format hike and fly racing. And yeah, as Dan said, we did some races together with him, very kindly supporting me, and ended up at the X-Pier in 2018, which ruined my body, and I haven't really recovered since. But yeah, I love it. So organising this year's race, I'm quite excited. I shouldn't say that, but the forecast is looking quite good for the weekend. So yeah, thanks very much, Dan, for hosting this. And yeah, winner of last year's Dragon Hike and Fly, Dan Starsmore.
Yes. Right. Paragliding, that's obviously Alistair's company, and that's who is hosting Dragon Hike and Fly this year and all years. Also mention as well Southeast Wales Hang Gliding Paragliding Club. This year I've taken over the committee position of Hike and Fly rep. It's the first time they've had a committee member who's dedicated to Hike and Fly, and I think probably the first club to do so as well. So do take some time if you can to look at the website. We've got a lot of information on there dedicated to Hike and Fly. A lot of the stuff we'll talk about tonight's on there. We also include classic routes in Southeast Wales. So if you're interested in flying in Southeast Wales on some routes, we sort of document them there. And we also have some challenges. So we have the Welsh Three Peaks, which you may have heard about, and we've got a couple more coming up too. Quick look at the scope for tonight's chat. I'll talk about what I'm aiming to achieve from this chat with you tonight. We'll look at racing, and that's kind of what this chat is based on. It's racing more than the concept of hike and fly. We'll look at the role of supporter, the idea of planning a race, and the psychology, Southeast Wales, weather, and a quick look at the arena. I've said at the bottom what we're not going to be talking about is fitness or the latest hike and fly gear. There's a reason for that. Neither of those are going to change for anybody between now and the race, so you're going in what you got. And also I think it detracts from the racing. Lots of people put off ever entering a race because they don't feel like they're fit enough to enter, or they've got the equipment, lightweight equipment, that is suitable for it. What I say is go into it with whatever you have and give it a go. Right, so the aim of this presentation for myself, I want to encourage entry into hike and fly racing. Lots of people talk to us and say they'd like to enter, but they are put off by the idea of it being a sufferfest, or they haven't got the equipment they need to enter. We'd like to talk about developing a bit of race efficiency, how to move efficiently in the hills, because that is ultimately what we're trying to achieve. For me, that's what I enjoy doing, is getting out into the hills and using my glider on my back and my legs to move as efficiently as I can around the hills. So I'd like to try and start to drive that idea of planning for a race and being as efficient as we can over the ground. To spell rumours, there's occasionally you hear the odd bits and pieces you just think aren't true, and they kind of put people off from ever entering a race. So I'd like to try and knock those on the head. And then at the end, we're open to answering any questions. And there are, looking at names, we've got some pretty experienced hike and fly pilots in the group as well, who will probably be able to chip in as well. Right, so without further ado, we'll get into it. First thing I want to talk about is time awareness when you're on foot. So we talk about speed, distance, and time. What I'd like everybody to get an idea of is how fast they move on foot. If we set a task and there is a 20-kilometer hike or 10-kilometer hike at the beginning of it, it's knowing how long that's going to take you. Hopefully with a bit of practice you'll get a good idea. Example times we can give you, I'll give you in a minute, but the idea is that if you're out on the hill, you take off, you fly somewhere, you land somewhere you're not expecting to land, which inevitably happens in these hike and fly races. You then look at a map and you go, right, well, I've got a ridge, it's 10 kilometers away from me. Then how long is that going to take you to get to that ridge? So you look at your map, you can look at the terrain from your own experience and a bit of knowledge about what you're capable of. You can determine a time you're going to be arriving at that hill, and then you can relate that back to what you picked up in your planning, your weather, your daylight, your race time. So just example times, if you haven't got a feel for it, I'd say ballpark figures. If you're walking on the flat, on trails, you're probably going to be covering about 5 kilometers per hour. So a ridge that's 10 kilometers away, you can anticipate it taking you a couple of hours. I've also said hill, because as soon as we start to introduce hills and climbs, we're going to slow down quite dramatically. And for me, I reckon benchmark would be if you've got a 500-meter hill, and I say 500 because that's quite a useful figure around the Black Mountains. A lot of our hills are generally a 500-meter hike up. You're looking probably about 45 minutes to an hour once your legs start getting a bit tired to get to the top of it. So you imagine you've landed in the Usk Valley and you need to get up Magic Mountain. It's going to be 10 kilometers and 500 vertical meters. You could probably anticipate it's going to take you a good 2.5 hours maybe to get to the top of that, 2.5 hours. And I'm talking, you're getting tired now, tired legs, it's the middle of a race. Now what we're going to do with this information, like I say, is tie it in with our planning. So a couple of points I put at the bottom there is our weather. In the planning phase, we'll have a good look at the weather forecast and we'll talk about it in a bit. But you'll have an idea of how the day is going to pan out, what the wind directions are, have an idea of what you're moving through and what ridges you're going to be potentially flying on. And you'll also have an idea when the weather's forecast to improve or maybe deteriorate. So got some nasty noises there. Is that just me? Is that gone?
Yeah, Dan, you're getting reverb.
I am. How's that? That's good. Excellent. Right then. So the idea being that if we are in a race and we know that 4 o'clock in the afternoon we're expecting some rain and maybe the wind to pick up, you land in the Usk Valley at 2 in the afternoon, and you know it's going to take you 2.5 hours to get to the ridge line. Is it worth getting to that ridge line to try and fly when you know the weather's going to deteriorate on you, or is it worth maybe proceeding on foot for 3 hours planning on a forecast that's improving? So that's what we're trying to push there, is time awareness on foot. So as I say, 5 kilometers per hour on foot. If you introduce a hill, call it about 45 minutes to an hour per 500 meters. You say that's fair, Alistair? I assume that's a yes. All right, on to the next then. So we've got our idea in our heads, what we're capable of on foot. Then we'll have a look at mapping. So what I'd say first off is if you're coming to the Black Mountains this weekend and you haven't flown here before, have a look at the maps in advance. Try and build up a mental image of the general orientation and layout of the hills. A good exercise that I like to do maybe is just study a map and then pen and paper, just roughly draw ridges on hills, just so that you can visualize wind directions and you can visualize what your soaring lines would be, or your cross-country lines might be. Now we talk about the apps we use. A lot of us use mapping apps. So ViewRanger unfortunately is being disbanded now, and I believe being taken over by Outdoor Active. The screenshot there is ViewRanger. There are others out there, and I know people are experimenting with them, so I'll be interested to know if there are other apps that people recommend. Not a massive fan of Outdoor Active at the moment, but I think it's probably going to be something that develops. With the mapping, make sure in advance you download your maps. And And you might find there's different layers as well. I know with URange, you could download your OS and your open cycle routes. So make sure you get them for the whole area that you're going to be hiking in. It's very easy to end up in valleys around the Black Mountains where there's no phone signal. And if you haven't downloaded before, you won't get the data. Then once you've got your apps and you're happy with your maps are on there, learn how to plot a route quickly and efficiently. So you can see on this screenshot to the right, all I've done is a day I went out walking in the Black Mountains, and I just put a series of points on there. It took me maybe a couple of minutes to plot a route that is 21 kilometers long, and from that I get my elevation gain and my distance over the ground. Revert back now to what we talked about before with time on foot. From there I can then start to think about the timing that I can expect to arrive at my destination. Going to pop back to time awareness. The other thing we've got on here is run, walk, or wait. There's lots of chat about running in races. For the majority, I wouldn't recommend running. You'll see people have a sprint start for a bit of a better photo start, but you aren't feasibly going to run a whole race with a paraglider on your back. This is one of the rumours that goes around a little bit. You do not run a whole race with a paraglider on your back. It's not achievable. You're more likely going to be walking. You might find if you've got the energy or you're going downhill, I do as well, if I'm going downhill, a trot just opens up the legs, it stretches you out and you cover ground faster. It feels the right thing to do, but you don't need to be pushing yourself hard. Last year, the race did start with a bit of a run down the canal path, but that was because in the planning phase, we saw that the weather was going to be deteriorating throughout the day, and a group of us decided it was probably best to cover that portion faster on foot. But otherwise, I'd say walking is the mode of transport. That's our time and our mapping. We'll have a quick cover of the mandatory equipment for the race. So the obvious parts are in black, and I'm not going to go into detail on those, but there's two items on there I've highlighted in red, which is your survival blanket and your torch or lamp. Both of those are mandatory to have in the race. They're easily forgotten, and they're also easily given to a supporter. So what I'd advise is before the race, put those into a side pocket of your harness, somewhere you're not going to touch it and you can't leave them behind. And then onto other equipment. So this stuff isn't mandatory, but it is worth talking about. Water purification up in the Black Mountains and the beacons, there's plenty of running water, but there are also a lot of sheep up there. So if you're going to be drinking from the streams, it's worth treating them. I personally carry a few iodine tablets or other form of tablets to treat the water in my glider bag. Other people might use a filter, which is maybe a bit bulkier, but also does the same job. Batteries, phones are heavily used in the races. For me, the phone goes on at the beginning of the race and it doesn't go off. I'm using it for my tracking, for all my navigation, communication, and obviously my weather assessment as well. So that's pretty heavy use on the phones. I use a 10,000 milliamp hour battery, and that tends to do me for a whole day. Probably could run into another, but I would recommend having a backup as well. Clothing. On the move, just sort of think about wicking clothing, maybe something that takes sweat away from your body. Try to avoid too much cotton because it will hold the moisture. You'll be hot when you're moving on foot, but when it comes to flying, you don't want to be soaking wet because as soon as you get high, you get cold. So just think about wicking clothing, just to try and get that sweat away from your body. Warm clothing, as I say, we're moving around fast on the ground, but when you're flying, you're going to want your gloves and your jacket and your layers. Now that is something when we get to the supporter, you can easily leave your supporter or ask them to carry for you. Waterproof equipment as well. Now this coming weekend doesn't look too bad at the moment, touch wood, but I've certainly been involved in races where it's pissed it down in rain halfway through and we've had a whole day of hiking in the rain. So think about waterproof gear. Cheap ponchos are a great purchase, just these things you see tourists walking around with. A bin bag as well, just to cover your equipment. You don't want to be worrying about wet reserves or wings during the race. So just stick it in a bin bag, back into the rucksack, and that should keep most of the moisture off. I say spare footwear, that is well worth having. I know when I supported Ali a few years ago, he had multiple pairs of shoes, which I carried in the car because he ended up walking in the rain. And that is a godsend. If you're worried about things like blisters and things, to be able to put on a pair of dry shoes is worth having. Right, keep them going down. We've got telescopic poles. This, I reckon, is, I'd be surprised if people aren't using poles. But if you aren't, give them a go. They do improve your efficiency moving over the ground, and they give you a huge amount of stability as well. You'll find that moving up or downhill, you'll feel like you're in four-wheel drive. And also, it will help your posture. You'll find you're standing up straighter, and so you're not fatiguing by leaning over against the bag. Gaggle flying is potential for gaggle flying. I have gaggle flown in a race with Ali and Paul Bingham in Borns to Fly a few years ago. It's not something, a radio isn't something I wanted to carry all day long, but for that 45-kilometer flight, having them on a radio made quite a difference. And then Volbiv equipment. Now, I'm personally, my feel about Volbiv in these races is I don't want to, because for me, the race is an opportunity to travel light and move through the hills. But that's not for everybody. Some people want to go out and Volbiv as well. There's a lot to be thinking about here, though. You've got your sleeping mats, sleeping bags, shelters. Dry clothing comes into this. You're going to have to be carrying it, and all your food. So there's a huge penalty in weight by Volbiv, and this is why I'm pushing supporter. We'll keep on. We'll go on with that in a bit. Right then. So you got all your equipment in your bag, and let's look at something we rarely get talked about. That's how we set up our rucksacks. Who's the culprit? Is it just me, or is that?
No, someone.
SCW chairman.
Yeah, someone's got like a cat. I'll try and do something about this.
Is it cloud-based?
Oh, it's Southeast Wales chairman. There we go.
Hey. Practicing hike and fly.
Yeah.
Right then, start again. Rucksack. So we don't talk about it very much, and personally this is a bit of a pet peeve with me. I don't understand why in all our outdoor sports and pursuits rucksacks are built to carry a load with structure in them, and yet in paragliding, where we're carrying at least 10 kilos on our backs, the rucksacks are floppy and no structure to them at all. So let's look at how we can set them up to improve that. The reason I'm doing this is because a well-structured rucksack that carries the weight well will improve your posture, get your body upright, and it will also aid you dramatically regarding your fatigue throughout the race. So to do this, try and pack to get the center of gravity of your rucksack closer to your body. There's a couple of pictures here. They talk about frames. Basically, I think the one on the left is probably more relevant. As it shows, get the heavy items close to your body. It makes sense. If you put heavy items further away, you're going to have to lean against the bag to counteract that. A method of doing this, if you're folding your glider into 4, maybe think about reducing that to 3. That will just condense it. It'll extend the height, but that's not really a problem. Put the heavy items in your bag.
It was about 3 hours.
That's Keith Ash, you're muted as well.
Put heavy items close to your body and on top of the bag. So let's get, again, it's all about center of gravity close to your body. To give the rucksack some sort of rigidity, you've got compression straps. Generally all rucksacks have got some sort of compression straps down the sides of them. So use those to really snug it down and try and firm up the contents of that rucksack to create this solid unit. That will then enable you to get the weight of the rucksack onto your hips and off your shoulders. Like 80–90% of paragliders that are carried are generally being carried around on the shoulders, And if you imagine trying to race for a couple of days with all that weight going through your shoulders, it's all just transferring to your legs through your torso. And that is exhausting. If you can get it straight onto your hips, you cut out the top half of your body. And the final part is the stabilizing straps, which generally aren't particularly well used. The picture at the top there, the stabilizing straps are the straps that run from the top of the rucksack to the shoulder straps. And they slip, and you'll see a lot of them are let out. And by pulling those in, you'll find that pulls the bag up against your back and center of gravity close to your body. So I just recommend, whilst you're preparing for the race, play around with your setup, getting the center of gravity and the weight close to your body, and play around with the straps so that you get the weight onto your hips and you pull on the stabilizing straps. And I think you'll find that that will then allow you to improve your posture, stand up straight, and be less fatiguing when you're moving. Can't see my own title under this one. Right, so we're on communication. Quite a big topic in hike and fly, because obviously we disappear into the hills, and we need to allow people to know where we are. Ali, as the race committee, cannot keep track of 50 odd pilots as they move through the hills. Mobile signal in the Black Mountains, generally on top of the hills in the Black Mountains and Beacons, you're going to find some phone signals, so it's not too bad. But as soon as you drop into the valleys, you're not going to get anything. Think about this before it's difficult when you're flying, because you're not necessarily going to be able to send a message before you descend into a valley. But if you're walking, you're going to drop into a valley. Think about this before you drop into the valley. Send a message to your supporter or to the committee to say where you are and where you're going. Prepare for the race as well. Like I'm sure everybody is using Telegram. There are two groups there. We've got the chat group and we've got the tracking group. So get onto those, see how they work, and learn how to use the hashtag map function to inform people of your location. That then translates through to XCRT, which hopefully you've all got set up using the XC bot. And if you haven't, please message the group and we'll help you with the setup. That will enable you to do your hashtag map, or even pair your tracker, whether it be phone or other, to XCRT, and then we can keep a good eye on where you are. Tracker setup is worth taking a little bit of time. They can be a bit fiddly to sort out. A tracker app that I just started using, which works very well, is what's highlighted in blue at the bottom there. It's called Tracker. The website is mycloudbase.com. I'm not sure if it's just Android or iPhone as well. Is it just Android, Ali?
Yep, it's just Android.
Just Android, that one. So you have to search around for iPhone equivalent.
So just on that, Dan, iPhone users don't need it because Fly Sky High links to Live Track 24 and thus XCRT. Okay, so that's good. The tracker app works very well. The little man with the yellow raincoat and his magnifying glass, that is the logo for the app as well, if you're looking for it. But it's worth taking some time to set that up now, so on Friday night you're not messing around with it, and it's worth having as well for when you're just out flying generally. Your communications, we'll talk about when should you communicate. Well, I've already mentioned if you're going to drop into a valley, send out a message so that we don't end up with a search party looking for you as a result of you losing track of you. What information? Heads up direction you're traveling in, and that information as well is kind of erring towards the supporter. So if you got lucky enough to have a supporter in the race, think about, although you've had a lovely flight, what you actually want out of them, where you'd like to meet them, what equipment maybe they should have with them, things like that. So just have a little think about the information that you would like to put across. And like I say, think ahead. So you've had a good flight, but actually what's coming next in the next half an hour, what's important. Nutrition. This is, I don't know, some people eat very little, some people eat quite a lot, and I'm on the quite a lot end of the spectrum. So going into the race the night before, make sure you have a good meal. Lots of carbohydrates will be good. A good breakfast in the morning.
And in between the race days, a good evening meal is well worth having as well. When you're moving on foot, try and give yourself some variety. I've fallen foul of this, so I set up a bag of trail mix, and it's like the Morrison special, and all you get are raisins and a few salted nuts, and 4 hours of that and you're absolutely fed up with it. So make sure you make up some good bags of trail mix. Take stuff you like, sausage rolls, cornish pasties, sandwiches, whatever it is, energy bars, fruit, but have a variety so that you don't become sick of it, because if you become sick of it, you're not going to eat it, and if you don't eat, your energy levels are going to drop and you're going to fall behind. Personally, I make trail mix bags, just small freezer bags, probably make up 6 or 8 of them, and in those I put decent nuts, cashew nuts, some sort of sour Haribo, bits and pieces I quite enjoy eating, you know, M&Ms, things like that. But make up your own trail mix bags. You can, if you've got a supporter, you can just take 1 bag, you can leave the rest of your supporter. That's something that they can keep on offloading onto you. Water, again, we're going to be moving for, I don't know, could be up to 12 hours, I suppose. So you're going to need to consume an awful lot of water as well. Again, some people don't drink much water. I drink an awful lot of water. So I carry a decent sized platypus, 2 litres. I do get support, so I'm always refilling my water. But as I say, I carry Pura tablets as well so that I can refill out on the hill if I have to. When to eat. If you're beginning to feel low on energy and you haven't got the energy or motivation to get up a hill, it's probably because your energy levels are beginning to diminish as a result of not eating enough. I force myself to eat at least every 20 minutes. It doesn't have to be big, but I have my bag of trail mix and the side pocket in my rucksack so I can reach it when I'm walking. And I reach in there and grab a couple of bits of Haribo or some nuts, and I just eat them and put them away. And that just keeps me ticking over constantly with a decent energy level. At some point, you're probably going to want a slightly bigger meal, maybe when you meet your supporter or when you're waiting to fly, and then you can, you know, put away the sandwiches and things. But make sure you keep on eating. This is probably, a hike and fly race is probably the most physically demanding thing any of us are going to do this year. And you're going to have to fuel yourself around that. So make sure you keep on eating and drinking as you do. Finally, at the bottom, decision making. Big thing in hike and fly racing is the psychology of it, and you're putting yourself in places you probably wouldn't normally go, and you're trying to make sensible decisions. If you're not thinking straight because you're not eating properly, you're going to put yourself in danger. So do keep on eating and think and take it seriously. All right, psychology, I've just mentioned it. Something as a subject I'm sort of getting more interested in with psychology of these races. I absolutely love hike and fly races. I think it's one of the best things that we can do to disappear off into the hills as a group, leapfrogging one another, using our own assessment on the terrain, the weather, to move along that course efficiently. I think for the majority of people as well, it'll be much the same. As soon as you start racing, all the anxiety of the race standing on the start line will fade away. You'll cross the start line and you'll immediately start to look around yourselves at the hills and the weather and what's going on around you, and you'll start planning for what's coming next. So don't fear a race for, you know, the anxiety at the start. I guarantee your senses will kick in once you start moving and you'll start thinking about paragliding. You have to consider as well, and I've fallen foul, I've got a couple of examples, what impact the adrenaline, the excitement of the race actually does to your judgment and risk assessment as well. It's very easy in a race when you're charging along and you've got 10 competitors around you all charging up hills and flying off things to get swept up in it. You know, if conditions aren't great, you need to take some time to think about what you're capable of and whether you're beginning to start to take too many risks. This then becomes more of an issue as we start to get fatigued, because if we start to get fatigued, our judgment starts to lapse, and we also start to become maybe a little bit desperate to get into the air because we want to rest our legs and we want to fly. Or as I say, we see other people flying and we think, well, if they're flying, I can be flying, or you're concerned about the person behind you flying over your head. So as you start to get tired, do be aware of yourself and your own mental state, and whether flying or walking, whatever it is you're doing, is the right decision. So what I'd say at the bottom of this is take 5 minutes to think about your decisions. If you're standing on a hill and you're maybe feeling a bit tired, eat something as we mentioned, have a drink, take 5 minutes and think about your decisions. The other thing we can do is talk to someone. So there's plenty of other people racing around us. It's a nice thing about Ali's race or any race along a task line is we all follow a route, and you're probably going to be surrounded by other pilots as well. So if you've got doubts about flying, I'm sure someone else will have doubts about flying, or if you need a bit of clarification or even encouragement to get in the air, you can talk to other people. A couple of examples I wanted to give on this. The first one is it's the second most stupid place I ever put myself on a paraglider, and that was in a hike and fly race out in the Alps. I think Ali probably remembers it as well. I flew myself knowingly down a valley with no landing options into a headwind because that was the direction the task was going. And I consciously gave up my last landing option and had probably 10 very uncomfortable minutes as I flew down this valley, trying to tell myself to sit back and be streamlined, but really wanting to sit up and look at the trees below me. The only reason I did that was because I was in this race, and the psychology, the mental state I was in was, I must race, I must get down the valley. As it happened, it worked out, but I wouldn't say that's a lesson in what I did. It's more, I wouldn't have done that on a standard flying day. The other example is just from last year's race. I was having a good race with John Westall. I knew that he was hot on my heels. Got up to Outer Esker in quite strong conditions. People were flying, but they were fairly top-end conditions. Now, I thought, John's on my heels. If I now decide to take the canal path back to Krakow, he will probably fly and go past me. And so, although I was balancing, I thought it's still flyable, there are people in there, I flew. And that was one of the things that was in my mind. I took off, and about probably 30 seconds later, John Westall arrived on the hill, and he saw me flying, and he thought, well, the only way I'm going to catch Dan is by flying. But he wasn't too sure about flying. He took off, had a rough old time as well, and we both flew back to Krakow. And it was in Krakow that he said to me, had I walked down the canal path, so would he. And so we both flew because we were aware of the other person and the risk, as I mentioned previously, of being leapfrogged or being caught. So again, how you mitigate that, I don't know. It's that you've got to just be aware that this is a risk. And it's in your mind. Again, if I could have talked to John probably before then, we might have said, well, let's just hold hands and run down the canal path together. As it is, we both got in the air. It all turned out okay. Right then, for the flying, not a huge amount really to talk about in flying because we all fly differently. Some of us don't know the area as well as others. We all fly different wings. So flight assessment when you're out in a hike and fly race, it's entirely up to you. We're not on recognized, well, some of the sites will be recognized, but you're not on recognized takeoffs every time. Hopefully going into this, maybe you spent a little bit of time out in the hills and you've sort of done your own site assessment, but you're going to be the one who's responsible for looking for the risks around you. So the usual things, just looking for obstacles, looking for indications of maybe being in the lee of something or dodgy conditions in the air. What I would say is if you're standing on the hill and it doesn't feel like your normal day out paragliding, it's probably not right. You shouldn't be pushing your limits in a race. In preparation for a race, you might find you train by walking up hills and flying off in maybe slightly different wind directions than you're normally used to. But in the race, it shouldn't feel any different to what you're generally used to. And I'm sure a lot of the time it won't do. It'll feel absolutely fine. Once you're actually in the air, I say take your time. We're not in a PWC, we are in a hike and fly race, where generally if you're in the air, you're moving a lot faster than you would be on the ground. So you've worked probably quite hard to get into the air at this stage. Now's the time to slow it down, enjoy where you are, to have a rest and look around yourselves. If it means that you spend 5 or 10 minutes just soaring a ridgeline, looking at other pilots and looking at the conditions, that's absolutely fine. There's no rush. And if you're flying across the valley and you hit some zeros, it's not the lift you wanted. Zeros is still better than nothing and will make you across that valley. And as I say, a little bit further down, land you high. So this is something it's got a bit of a transition, maybe even hike and fly mentality over normal cross-country mentality. It's okay if our feet do touch the floor. So if you're crossing onto a hill and it's maybe not as lifty as you thought, you're going to soar straight back up the side of it, there's no point in soaring that hill all the way back down to the valley floor. A slope landing, or even if you sunk onto it and it's just, you know, the cycle isn't quite coming through just yet, maybe it will in 10 minutes, landing high will save you a lot of time. You know, it's easy to reset onto the top of a hill, give it 10 minutes, have a think, reset yourself, maybe eat something, and look at how the conditions are developing. And who knows, 15 minutes later, you probably find there's a cycle that takes you up to base and you can continue with your flight. It's better to be up high with that potential than in the valley floor, regretting soaring nothing onto down to the deck. And last bit there, I said, if it feels slow in the air, think about how much slower it would be on foot. Like I say, zeros are, you turn in zeros all day long. Even pushing into a headwind, I've pushed in some of these races into some probably stronger headwinds than I would normally do on a normal day out. But if you look down and look at your ground speed, even 4, 5, 6 kilometers an hour is faster than I would be covering on foot, especially looking at the terrain we're covering. So watch your flight computer and look at the ground speed, and don't be in a rush because it doesn't feel like you're progressing at the pace you want it to be. I bet you're still going to be progressing faster than you would be if you're on foot once you're in the air. Right, supporter. So something you're probably, a lot of you are aware, and I know I've got a few of my volunteer supporters on the group at the moment, why I am so keen on pushing the concept of a supporter. The BHPA are getting very interested in hike and fly, and the concept of having a supporter in a race is almost a discipline in itself. How a supporter can help a pilot throughout a race is its own discipline, and you can see it in a lot of the races that we all like to watch, in the X-Alps, the Xperiod, Born to Fly, whatever it is. The supporter has a very key role. That's kind of why I'm keen to push it as well, is because if you're interested in hike and fly races and you want to go off and race in Europe, you'll find a supporter is also mandatory. So there's no point in skipping that stage at this point and going, oh, I'm not going to have a supporter, I'm going to Volbid my way around it. Because you go up to the Alps and you race against a bunch of these Frenchies and Swiss guys, they're going to be supported, and they're going to be bloody efficient supporters as well. They're going to be moving their pilots through the hills very quickly. So it's worth training at this stage, this whole concept of a supporter and what they're actually able to offer to you. I personally learned the role of supporting by supporting Ali. And as soon as I got going as a paraglider pilot as well, I kind of got a gist of actually what I could offer. Going into it before, I was probably, I don't know, I thought I'd be mopping his brow and giving him moral support. But there's a lot to be given. So think in advance going into this race. We've very lucky to have 7 volunteer supporters now in this race. We might find we get a couple more as well. So there's a lot of pilots going into this going, oh, I'd like, I don't know, a water stop at 5 in the afternoon, or I'd like my tent to be delivered to me. Think in advance what you could actually get out of your supporter. And you can do that as well in the race by thinking ahead of, you know, thinking about the forecast and your plan, but also it's quite a role for the supporter to be thinking ahead of the pilot, where they're going and what they're potentially going to need. I've looked down this list here. So say you're following your pilot around somewhere you're not familiar with it, and it looks like they're going to land somewhere, or they're on foot and they're heading towards a hill and they need to find a way to take off. Navigation is something you can sit down with a map, and it's a damn sight easier for someone stationary to look at a map than it is for the person on foot to be looking at a map. You can be looking at it and finding a route. You can even stake it out. You can set off and just make sure the route actually exists. And then when they get to you, point them in the right direction. Getting in the Black Mountains isn't such a big issue. Well, not for those who know their way around it, but for guys who aren't familiar, it could be a huge help. And as soon as you go out to the Alps or you go and race anywhere else in terrain you just aren't familiar with, having someone tell you where to go will make a big difference on your efficiency on the ground. Weather assessment, you know, again, supporter can be looking at that. They might be able to drive to a coal in a ridge line or whatever it is, tell you what the wind actually is, or monitor, I think said somewhere down, watch other pilots and see where they're going. Carrying non-essential equipment. The list that I had up previously, we talked about the mandatory equipment. All the non-essential equipment, you can ditch onto them. There's no point in you carrying that equipment over any grid distance more than you have to. So in there, you can think about all your warm equipment for flying, so your jackets and your gloves. What about all your water? Like I say, I like to carry at least 2 litres of water, and that's 2 kilos. So if I'm going to walk up a mountain and I've got the option of having a supporter carry that 2 kilos for me, I'm definitely going to take that option. Extra food. What else have I got on there? Flight instruments as well. So we've got to carry our own GPS and phone, which probably constitutes most people's flight instruments now, but if you carry more than that, you can ditch that too. So these are all items that can be carried by a supporter. Food and water is so obvious. Again, not carrying the extra weight, not trying to carry supplies for 2 days on your back. It makes a big difference having a supporter meet you to replenish you with food and water. Dry clothing and shoes. You know, these races can be over several days, so you might end up caught out in the rain. It's not just morale. If you get wet feet, wet socks, the impact that blisters will have on you and the speed that you can move around the mountains is going to be dramatic. It's going to spoil your race. So having someone turn up with a pair of dry clothes and a towel and a dry pair of shoes will probably make quite a big difference when it stops raining to you. Accommodation, even this race, if I'm obviously participating in this race as well, if I find myself not near Crickal, I expect we'll probably just camp locally in the van. Same thing goes for anybody. When you're in the Alps and you're covering bigger distances, maybe you're going to be winging it. You can see a picture there. That was a race that we did a few years ago, and we had a brilliant support team that year. 3 camper vans in trail, hot food being provided for us, dry clothes being delivered to us. It was a good setup, that, and obviously that's our accommodation. That's literally the point where we stopped that day, got out of the vans the next morning and continued. Medical. This is sort of, I'm thinking more blisters. Dare I say, chafing might be a thing as well. It's not the supporter's responsibility to deal with the application of the cream, but you know, if you're out and you're covering ground, you might want some of this stuff delivered to you. So have a few plasters and things set aside. Safety is another big role of the supporter, and this is why it's generally mandatory in the European races. The supporter is going to be the person that's really keeping an eye on you. The committee can't keep track of you. The supporter is going to know where you are. They're going to be following you on live tracking and have a good idea where you are. Let's say communication in the race committee is generally done through the supporter, and there is potential to fly together. It's a tricky potential. I didn't manage to fly a valley because, as you can imagine, if you walk up a hill with someone with a paraglider, you've then got to carry your own. If I had even been able to meet him at the top, the car is generally in the wrong direction. So I can't fly cross country with him because the car and all our equipment's probably in the car. Maybe leading out, finding a few thermals, or even if there's a couple of supporters, you might be able to fly side by side. I did share a link on the South East Wales group. Benoit Uter's finished the 2017 X-Alps only 2 hours behind Kriegel Mara. It got very little publicity, but he flew into goal with his supporter side by side. So it was a real role being delivered there by a supporter. And then communication, that's how you're going to make this supporter role work. And for our 7 volunteer supporters, they're going to have their work cut out because we've got more pilots than supporters. So I'm going to have to maybe put 2 pilots on 1 supporter. And that's going to make this a little bit more tricky for them because they're going to try and keep track of 2 people. And you imagine if you end up with pilots on opposite ends of the course line, it could get a bit tricky. So communication is going to help you out here. Pilots, make sure you're talking to your supporters, saying where you want to be, using dropped pins. They've obviously got live track as well, and letting them know what you want. So that's your communication. I'd also like to say to any pilots using our volunteer supporters next weekend, it's your responsibility to provide them with what you want. So before the race starts, make sure you give them all your trail mixes and sandwiches, your dry shoes and bits and pieces. It's all in the car. Maybe get a big Tupperware box or something, 50-litre box, and stick everything that you want in that box so they can have it in the boot of the car. Then you can say, meet me here. They can come and find you. And you can dish out whatever you want. Right, a quick hypothetical task then. This is supporter pilot. This race actually is one we flew a few years ago. It started out in the West Beacons. If you can you see my cursor?
Yep.
Yeah, so we started down here in the valley, and the turn points went through Peak here, through Penifan, out to Lantoni, back to Talibont, and into Krakow. So quite a long task, but it's a good flying forecast. And I'd like to use this as an example piece for how to use a supporter. So you're starting down here, bottom left. Although it's lovely to have pictures of your supporter, the first thing you can immediately do, because this is all uphill, and you're going to be walking, where's my cursor? You're walking up this road, and then you're going to be climbing a peak, and say you're going to be climbing 300, 400 meters. That is immediately a very safe bet to use your supporter and start conserving your energy from the very beginning. So ditch your food and your water and your flying gear with them and tell them you're going to walk up the road. You'd like them to meet you, little green face on top of that hill with that equipment. So you've met your supporter up on the hill. They can be eyes and ears for you as well. Can help you set up. You can talk about your plan, and then you can send them off on their way. So off our paraglider goes, our pilot goes, flying across the hills. What does the supporter do at this stage? If you look at the terrain, we'll talk a bit about the terrain in the Black Mountains, but this is relevant for anywhere. What we've got is lots of high ground here. There's one road, the A470, that runs through, and then you've got the Usk Valley. So once the pilot has actually left the hill, the supporter is really stuck for offering any help until they pop out the other side and they're in the Usk Valley. So you need to be thinking about that maybe in your strategy when you're sending them off that way. They're going off into higher ground. What equipment might they need if they're actually unintentionally going to spend a few more hours out in the hills? Your supporter then, he's no use standing on that hill anymore, and they're no use anywhere else along the northern ridge. The best place they could probably do is position themselves downwind, even if they don't know where you are at this stage. Position themselves downwind, sit and wait, and watch the live tracking, look at the weather, and check out the routes. Hopefully at some point your pilot will ping up a message or contact you and say something along the lines of land is safe and my intention is this. So in this scenario, they're staying high. Okay, hopefully they've got enough water, they've got their purification tablets and they're good, and they can move around the high ground. But they most importantly said, what I'm trying to do is get to this location, and they sent a pin. Now, this plan might not go all the way through, it might change again, but at least you got communication and you got a rough idea where they're going to be. So there you go, send a pin, this is where I want you to be, supporter moves, and that's where they are. And our pilot comes down off the hills and lands with them. Where they closes in, immediately you can start thinking, right, flying gear, we can ditch that with our supporter, get some fresh food and water. This guy's been out in the hills for quite a long time, it's probably out of water, probably a bit low on energy, get some more food, and wet weather gear, wrap up your gliders and set off. Might be a bit of hiking now, so you can just sort of trail along with them along the roads, moral support and all that, and get to, this example, end of the day, somewhere to plan for the night. So your accommodation. Now, lots of guys saying, can I have my tents? You might find along this route, this will be the opportunity to ditch your tents on the pilots so that they can set off up into the hills. Next morning, you can hike together. So it's an opportunity then to hike up the hill together, supporter carrying your equipment, set up together, look at the weather, send your pilot off a merry way back to goal. And this is what I found supporting Alistair. It's a constant chase. So I'm now standing on top of a hill. He's flying cross country, and I've got to get back to the car and try and get ahead of him so I can continue off for some useful support. Then I can catch up with him, take that heavy gear off him, he can continue on foot. So this is the whole concept, is just about how you can move efficiently through these hills, minimizing what you're actually carrying as well, so you can last for longer. So I hope that makes some sense. Talk about the plan going into a race. So have a plan before you go into it. Look at the forecast, study your route, and think about your own abilities, as we talked about. Time.
Because they might learn something for the next.
Yeah, talk about your abilities and come up with a plan. You can talk this through to the supporter. You talk to other pilots as well in the race. Think about, as we've discussed before, timings, distance, and weather. So if the weather's going to deteriorate at a time, where do you want to be? Or if the race is going to start at 8 AM, but actually it's not going to be flyable until 11 a.m. You've got 3 hours. You know you're going to cover 5 to 6 kilometers an hour on foot. What hill can you get yourself to? Is that your plan? And then maybe have some contingencies in your mind. What if you get in the air and actually you bomb, what ridge lines are there along that route you can relight on and keep on going? Or the other side, if you end up flying a blinder, what are you going to do about calling your supporter in if you end up landing high, food and water? As I say, once underway, this plan is probably going to change. It doesn't last very long because conditions change, route choices change. So that is when your smaller plans come in. You start to then split the day up, and that for me is what distracts me from covering huge distance underfoot, is the fact you've got these small plans and you're starting to think, well, I've now landed in this valley, I've got 2 hours and I can walk to this ridgeline. So have a plan in your head. It's just a good mental model of how the day is going to develop, and it gives you something to steer towards. It gives you a goal as well towards the end of it, where you anticipate to be if you're on schedule. Which brings us on to personal goals. These races generally aren't set so that everybody can make the finish line. Set your own goals for the race. I don't know what the figure is, like 30% are supposedly meant to make it into goal. So good examples, if you've never raced in a hike and fly race before, maybe don't even be considering the finish line as your goal. Maybe think about a turn point. In that example, Lantoni from the start would probably have been a pretty good goal for anybody, because that would have been a wicked downwind flight, probably a bit of hiking in between as well. This is a westerly wind as well, I should have said, so the rest of it would have been back into a wind to get back to Taliban. So others might want to make a finish line. Personally, my goal in any of these hike and fly races is just to make the finish line. That's what I like to achieve. And I think regarding podiums, the races can go to anybody. You can have people flying absolute blinders over everybody else's heads that you weren't expecting. Conditions can change. So I think the podium is a free-for-all. But have a good idea before you go in what it is you want to do. I said start line as well. So many people put off ever entering these races because they have excuses. I reckon personal goal for a lot of people is just even making it to the start line. Right, in the UK then, other resources. Pilots who have raced in the UK and abroad. We've got some very experienced pilots in the UK who've done a lot of races. You might not know too much or hear too much from them. Obviously, Greg Hamilton is quite big on the scene. He's done ex-Pira, a few Borns to Flies, ex-Lakes. He's just done ex-Scotia as well, and obviously Dragon. We've got Rob Houghton down bottom right there. Rob does a huge number of the European races. I think Rob probably enlightens us more, but I think he's done the Eiger Tour and maybe Board Air, as well as the Borns to Fly. He does a lot out there. So on top of them, we've got all sorts of people, Alex Buck and co, who all been out Borns to Fly as well. So we've got a good community of pilots in the UK that's worth tapping into and talking about their experiences in these races and trying to glean some information from them. Another good method is live track races. So we've got the X-Alps coming up. I'm imagining a lot of people like me, I do become a bit addicted with it, looking at where pilots are going, following their lines, thinking, trying to think like they're thinking, you know, looking at the terrain and maybe looking at the forecast for the day, so I can try and visualize what the forecast is. You'll learn a lot about the terrain as well, and then see how the day pans out for them. I mean, I'm not going to try and compare myself to any of those guys that enter the X-Alps. They're probably going to fly and out hike me every day, but you can play along with it. Videos, there's a lot of good videos being produced for all of these races. We're very lucky to have the videos that Greg has produced for all the Dragon hike and flies, so we can go back and relive them, watch them and just sort of glean information from those. And then, as I said, the community is very strong as well in the UK, and it's growing. BHPA is starting to show some good interest in it too. That's sort of the racing. I hope that's sort of not too waffly. A quick look now, just more specifically at Dragon hike and fly for anybody going into it. Weather. There is a couple, we're all familiar with our RASPs and various other forecasts of windies and things like that, but there's a couple of others I just want to draw your attention to if you're not familiar with it. On the Blorange, on the South East Wales Club site, the Blorange, we have our own wind station. That's a live wind station and also has the trends on there. It's worth having that as a page that's open on your phone so you can update it. Personally, I do quite a bit in the Black Mountains, and I have built a mental model throughout the years what the wind on the Blorenge means to me. So, you know, 16 to 19 kilometers an hour in this example on the Blorenge might be more like 20, 25 up on the higher hills. It gives you a rough idea of what's going on. It might save you a hike up a hill that, you know, you get to the top and it's blown out just by looking at this. So that one's very useful. And I'm sure wherever we go, there will be wind stations just to learn. The other one is I'm a big fan of the mountain area, Brecon Beacons mountain area forecast. This is put together by a local meteorologist. He understands the hills, and what I particularly like is his winds. So he talks about, or she talks about, winds throughout the day, and there's the speed and then the gust. And generally, the gust is at 600 meters is the consistent speed we're going to be seeing at the top of the hills. So that's quite a useful one if you're planning your race and you're looking for maybe some wind speeds at altitude. Like in this example, I'd be looking at midday and thinking it's going to be 23 miles per hour at 600 meters. So that might map my day out a little bit. Just generally in hike and fly, I'm sure you do this, but just monitoring the conditions as you travel as well. Forecasts might come or go earlier or later, and there might be indications around you that you can be picking up on that suggest different hills are actually more appropriate. This is purely to mitigate you moving to the wrong hill, finding it's not flyable, when your efforts could have been better spent going somewhere else. Right, local knowledge, fairly nondescript this one. As I say, talk to local pilots who are racing, talk about their plans and where they're intending to go, and ask them. We're going to have a quick rough overview now of the arena with the hike and fly perspective. Let's see if I can get you onto my computer screen. 1 second. All right. Share, hopefully, internet page. Try and get. There we go. So you should be. Can you see terrain maps now? Is that yes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's right down here.
Yeah. So there you go. That's the Brecon Beacons and the Black Mountains. So this is looking now into the Dragon Hike and Fly this weekend, and this is our arena. Potentially, it could extend a little bit further north or further south down there. So this is Far West Beacons over here. Quite sort of, I'm not admittedly not done a huge amount over here, but quite boony, less developed and accessible maybe than the Usk Valley. And if you end up here, you're probably going to be up here for a little while by yourself. So you can see the ridges are still present, but they're not necessarily as defined.
I can just quickly run through that area, Dan.
Yeah, go for it.
Right. So you've got a very big east-facing ridge called Van Heer, which you can see to the north of Glen Tower. That joins on to what are known as the Carmarthenshire Vans, which take a northerly, light northerly. They're pretty big and steep. They're similar in appearance to Pen y Fan, really. But if we start in Llandilo and we were coming to the east in a westerly wind, it's something like a third of the way across the national park until you make it to your first westerly flying site, which is Van Gehrig, which Dan could put his cursor on. Go right a little bit more down, a little bit more, cross that road.
Oh yeah, okay, over here, sorry.
Down a bit and left. That one. Yeah, so that was used as a turn point a couple of years ago, and that's the furthest west I can take you while being within the national park. Other than that, we've got to go into the valleys to Nanty Moyle, which is quite a long way south of where Dan is at the moment. Okay, do you want to move down to the valleys? You can do, yeah. Unlikely to be used this year, I would give us a titbit. But yeah, you got a series of southwest northeast ridges that are almost all of them official flying sites of the club. Yeah. So it's amazing. If we can use them, we would, but in that wind direction, and it's just a very urban environment there. It's not conducive really to the best of hike and fly racing. Yeah, but it's good XC flying. Okay, and then we're into the heart of the Brecon Beacons just here, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with as well, but if you're not, there's Pen y Fan, which is our highest peak. You have a series of bowls here that take northerly winds. This, although it's not particularly defined, is kind of a southerly ridgeline as well. Talabon's here with an east face.
but all of these faces here have got potential to fly from. So that's around Pen y Fan. Lots of wind directions options there. There's a hill here I don't want to pass up, which is Torrefoil. I've flown off this hill here in all directions, I think, other than east. So I've flown from a north, a westerly, and a southerly with success. So that's, you know, you might find yourself in that area looking for somewhere to fly, a good option. In westerlies, we've used it a few times. That's Outer Esker. It's not much of a hill on here, but it's a good opportunity. It's in the lee side of the bigger hills. So generally on windier days, you might find a bit of shelter there to get into the air. And then over here, this is the Black Mountains, which has got a few familiar flying sites around it. So that's Pandy, which is our easterly ridgeline. That's Hay Bluff up there, which has the northwesterly faces here. And then we have a large westerly face, which runs all the way back down towards Crickhowell, which is not actually being named there. There's Crickhowell there, which is obviously where HQ is, but not necessarily where start or finish might be. But just give you some orientation on it. So that's there. Then down here we've got Sugarloaf. That's the skier that sits out there. And then the club site, we're talking about the Blorenge. That's where the wind station is based, on top of the Blorenge. So we're talking about winds here and trying to relate them into the hills around us. From a hike and fly aspect, a couple of features that are worth watching out for in the race. One is the River Usk. So the River Usk, here you go. It actually starts on this side, but it flows down through the Usk Valley, which is where the cursor is going, and through Abergavenny. Now it's worth pointing this one out because of the bridges. If you end up on foot, your bridges, you've got Abergavenny as a bridge, and then maybe 10 kilometers down the road, you've got Langriney, and then you've got to keep on going, Crickhowell, and then even further for the next. So the bridges are fairly sparse across the Usk. If you find that you're trying to cross from one side of the park to the other, have the river in mind. You don't want to be landing on the wrong side of it and then find you've got a loop of 5 kilometers or 10 kilometers to get around the thing. If it's just a case of hopping over the river, keep that one in mind. A few power lines and things to watch out for, but down the Usk Valley, but you should see those as you go. Bracken at the moment is beginning to grow up, so a lot of these lower slopes have got bracken coming up. It's about knee height now, so it's not going to cause too many issues, but just maybe a few tangles if you do land in it. But I personally wouldn't avoid landing in it now. It's absolutely fine. The higher ridges, which talking through all of these up here, are very well connected with footpaths and trails. Have a look at your mapping before, but every single high ridge you see here has got a solid footpath on it, and is generally the most efficient way of moving around these hills. If you find yourself in the valley, say you're towards the top of a valley, I've made the mistake before just trying to scale the side of these, and it's generally going to take me longer than just walking up to the top and finding the footpath and then moving along them. So again, have a look at the mapping, but you'll find that there's good footpaths generally connecting all these ridges. Also, you know, going into just a quick one as well, just on wind and valley flows as well. We do get valley flows in the Black Mountains. You can probably imagine where they are if you look at, there's the Severn Estuary down there, so we tend to get sea air coming in from the south here. This is the Usk Valley, generally feeds in through here and up the Usk Valley, and then you can imagine it starts coming up into the hills. The Black Mountains in particular, all of these ridges here are in parts soarable, and I've soared along most of these early morning or late evening. But even if you've got an easter or westerly forecast, as soon as that valley wind starts to come in, you'll find that the wind starts to get drawn up and it's going to bend that wind round, and it's going to make soaring them very tricky. You can see lots of spurs and things, so do watch out for that if you're in there and it's starting to kick off a bit. It's going to be absolutely pumping through at the top of it. Winds on top could be starting to get quite strong, and the valley winds are going to start pulling through, and you just want to be careful as you come through. Even if it's an easterly, I've had an easterly and I've flown down this ridge line, and sure enough, as I come down here, it's coming up around the side of Magic Mountain and up the valleys, and it's caught me out as I've come around the corner. So just keep it in mind. It's going to be dry, you know, potentially it's going to be drawing a bit, but otherwise I can't really go into how you fly around the Black Mountains. It's just a rough overview. Is there anything else you want to talk about there, Ali?
Overall, Dan, or in that area? I think
Overall, if you want to.
I took some notes during your presentation, and we've got some questions on the sidebar.
Okay. Right,
We could go through those.
Yeah, let me.
Some of them I tried to chip away at. There was like web URLs and things.
Okay.
Some of them are race relevant. So do you have a waypoint file to preload? That's from Charles. So I said, don't ask about the route yet. He said, oh, do we have a waypoint file? No, Charles. I generate the route on FlyXC. You'll be promulgated the route at the briefing. It will be distributed as a waypoint file via Telegram as well for those who don't use XC Track or Fly Sky High. But I would compel you to get on the bandwagon, because that's the future. That is the way to do hike and fly racing. And on that, when your supporter is there, on the hill with you, if they're a pilot, it's not some of the volunteers necessarily, but if they're an XC pilot, they can generate the next 30k of micro waypoints for you, and just give you a QR code. You zap it, you going, and you can fly the task that they set for you. To me, you've got a supporter like Dan was for me. They're in charge, as the captain of the team, really, and driving the day and everything that's going on. But I digress. That was a much more simple question. Carl had a question about fitness and training, especially for someone living in the flats. Dan said maybe not this evening to talk about that. I concur, it's a bit late. Find a diet.
I wouldn't call it a bit late. I just say go with what you've got. Don't, because otherwise it becomes an excuse not to do it. At the moment, go in and the fitness is irrelevant. Just go in and learn what you can from this race.
Because we've all lived in flat areas at times. You can put a treadmill on a 45-degree slope, or you can find a little staircase or something if you must have to train in that sort of area. But a lot of people, ultra runners, people drive to these places for the weekend and do some training once a week if you really want to commit to your hill training. Rosie says that she's not using Outdoor Active anymore. She's using OS Maps, so that's another mapping app that we might want to try.
Thank you, Rosie.
Michael or Mick, Mick Roch said, what's the minimum equipment the pilot must walk with to be valid? I think we've covered that. Mick, hopefully you've got that now from the briefing. It's also in the rules, so I put the rules up for everyone to look at.
I can't find it. There you go.
Jason says, the rules require back protection. I note that many previous competitors fly the Strike, me included. I guess a well-packed rear compartment is acceptable. Well, the Strike has a certified back protector in it. If you choose to take that out because you're on Vol Biv and you feel that you need to carry that much equipment, that is your back protection. So your tent and your sleeping bag are then your back protection. What you're not allowed to fly with is an empty harness or a string, Cortail cliff, something like this that has no back protector. That's the point. Telegram group for retrieves. Yeah, Richard, I've put 2 links below this message that was sent at 7:38. You've got access there to the Telegram chat group, which is where we put all the messages up and any questions people get. And then the tracking group is linked to XCRT. All competitors must be registered to that group by Friday. And because your Live Track 24 is all perfectly set up and you've registered for the race, on Saturday morning you turn your phone on and you'll be pinging out. Tommy says, I still never quite seem to dress well for a mix of sweaty walking and chilly cloud base. Down just gets damp on launch and is then rubbish in the air. Thin trousers or shorts and make the most of the pod, ? Assuming 50-50 walking, flying.
Yeah, I mean, I get away quite happily with shorts and a pod.
Yeah.
And then just a thin base layer is all I need on top. But if you just stay in that base layer once you set up your glider, your wicking top should dry out enough that it's okay.
Yeah, totally. And your supporter can bring you a spare t-shirt. So make use of them, as Dan said. Are bivy bags okay instead of a space blanket? No, you've got to take a silver blanket. That's it. Take a silver blanket. They weigh very little. Leave it in your harness. Anything else is Vol Biv kit that you may want to bring with you. That's fine. Charles says, can we have the URLs for these websites? So Holfwe is an app. There is a website if you want to do that, but just download the app for your phone. Orange can then be set as a favorite. There's loads of others in the UK as well. Remember that Windy now has the weather stations on it as well. So Windy has the Orange weather station. And I've also pinned below that the mountain area forecast that Dan highlighted. So that link is there. Tommy, Dragon t-shirt. Yeah, they're in my van. They're coming Friday. Or I might have to give them to you on Saturday morning because of the fact we're doing a Zoom meeting for the briefing again. That's it for questions. Thanks very much, everyone. I wrote a couple of notes. Greg stashed a load of water last year because he didn't have a supporter. Now, it seems that this year, most people who want to be supported, who weren't able to organise their support themselves, Dan has sorted you with a supporter. However, if you want to, you can leave your tent somewhere in the hills on Friday night. You're going to get briefed the routes about 7 p.m. You can zoom off in the car at 8 p.m. and ditch stuff wherever you want to. You're allowed to do that. Dan mentioned running. Yeah, I've seen too many people try and run for Ks and Ks and Ks with non-factory paragliding stuff. It's just not feasible at all. The guys who are running more have 6 kilogram packs, something like that, built for them by the paragliding companies, custom made harnesses, everything super, super light. Don't even try it. You'll ruin yourself. Dan mentioned flying with the supporter as well. We don't have a rule about this in the Dragon race because I'd love to see it. It would be super cool. In a lot of the international races, it's actually banned to fly with your official supporter. And this is made to a culture of having support crew teams, including like international level pilots leading out for you. And if you think about it ethically or the culture of the sport, should you really be getting led out for by the Swiss national team? I mean, half of the British team's in this race, so just follow them. Why not have a radio with your supporter, as well as all the other tracking? Radio is really handy. It doesn't take long to teach them how to use it. You can have private frequency, and we will have a safety frequency for the race. And finally, I'm just going to let someone in. Sorry. Finally, for me, about the race this weekend, we're going ahead. I like the look of the forecast at the moment, so fingers crossed. It might be the lightest wind Dragon Hike and Fly that we've had. I hope. So touch wood. So if you want clues, I want to send you deep into the hills and a nice big closed circuit. That would be the plan. But we will see. Who knows? Still 4 or 5 days away. Cool. Back to you, Dan. Thanks very much.
Okay, I just want to obviously I'll put my conclusion bits there. I'd just like to say my 7 volunteer supporters at the moment, we'll get back to you now. I imagine we might get a few more requests. I've had a couple more already this evening for support. We'll try and spread the load amongst you. You don't have the easiest job by trying to support 2 or 3 pilots in a race. We might need, your communications with the other supporters are going to have to be good as well, because if you find one pilot's gone to one end of the course line, the others at the other end, maybe you can start to think about swapping them around. So what we'll do regarding that is I'll just make sure I get a final head count on who wants support, try and divvy you out. Those who have already been in contact with your supporters, I'll try not to change. And then this week, start to think about the plan, communicate with one another. And as I say, the pilots, it's your responsibility to provide everything you want to the supporter. So all your food and water, buy a couple of 10-litre or 5-litre bottles of water from Morrison's or something, stick them in their car to use in the race. So tomorrow we will try and divvy out the supporters and pilots. Hopefully this evening sort of clarifies a few bits and pieces for our supporters and for the pilots who are maybe entering this race, having not done one before. Dan, there's just one final thing. Matt Tandy, who's in the meeting, just had something to mention to the competitors. Matt, if you'd like to go ahead.
Thanks, Ali. Thanks, Dan. Good evening, all. So I run the LiveTrack 24 profile for the Dragon, and you might be aware, those of you on the various chat forums like XC Tracer or the LiveTrack profiles, that there's a bit of a bug at the moment with LiveTrack 24 and FLARM devices And it's mostly been brought about by the recent EC rebate, which is a great thing, by the way, to get 50% off. And it's not just limited to XC Tracer, but that's been a bit of a boost. So LiveTrack24 has the ability, as well as your phone device with your profile logged in for things like Fly Sky High or XC Track, to actually link another device. And that could be a FLARM device, or it could be something like an InReach, which in principle sounds fantastic. However, there is a bug. And the bug is to do with the FLARM devices. So if you put your FLARM ID into LiveTrack24, for some reason we can't fathom yet, it takes you off xcrt.aero, which clearly is a valuable resource. The only workaround we know of at the moment is to delete your profile or use a second profile if you're happy with that, so that you will definitely appear on XCRT. So those who've entered it, they've tried deleting it, putting in all zeros, putting in all spaces. They cannot remove it from the profile. We're trying to get hold of Manolis, who runs LiveTrack24, and Tim Pentreath and I are both engaged, but with no joy. So I'd suggest, Ali, that for the race, given the importance of XCRT, any pilots who've used their FLARM device with their extant profile, they're going to have to create a separate profile for the Dragon, if you are content with it, and then run a test to make sure they can see themselves tracking on XCRT. The big clue is that if you've recently flown and you go to the LiveTrack homepage and check your flights, you will appear as a sailplane profile, not a paraglider. And that appears to be where the bug comes from. If you like using your FLARM to track with, don't forget there are other ways your supporters can use that. There's something like the OGN-driven websites. You know, just type in where are the gliders, or spot the gliders, so I think it's called. So it's a secondary means of seeing a live tracking profile, but that uses FLARM. But to get the benefits of LiveTrack24 from your cell phone, then you're going to have a pure profile that's not been, should we say, contaminated by FLARM. Are you happy with that, Ali? Dan, are there any questions on that, you think?
That's great. And if anyone is in that situation where they've registered for the race on LiveTrack24 as they were asked to, and now they're using a device that's causing this conflict, please get in touch with me. Let me know, because it's very difficult for us to remove you from a pilot list as well.
Yeah.
So you'll have to set up and re-register, but just let us know that you're doing it, because there'll be 2 of you on the race. I think that's right, Matt. Is
yes, yeah. And ideally we'll be able to you know, get a confidence check for everyone's profile before the race begins, because as Ali says, once we start, it's a very tricky situation to try and do changes mid-race. We have done it before, but it's not an ideal situation. It causes a lot of unnecessary grief for supporters as well as organisers.
Yeah, it's so important for the race that everyone is sorted with their live tracking, XCRT membership, and registered on LiveTrack24, and that your device works on the Saturday morning, because we just want to see 50 odd trackers just ping up when we, like 10 minutes before the race. It's a big help. Great, thanks, Dan. Go for it.
Cheers. I haven't got anything else to say, I don't think.
Lovely. Thank you all, and see a lot of you on Friday night, and have a great week. Thank you very much.
See you at the weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye for now. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.